that we're seeing massive developments in technology, AI, the XR that you were talking about, all of these things that we've advanced so dramatically, so quickly in the past decade. And we overlay these things on top of each other. And we realize that as a country, that there are bad actors in the world that want to do bad things to us.
Welcome to the Startup Defense. My name is Callye Keen. Today I have Andrew Glenn. Andrew is a man of many talents, really robust background, leading innovation and engineering on the military side and moving over into private capital and working with Futures Command. It's a lot of territory to cover here. Andrew, before we get started, I have so many questions for you. What are you passionate about right now?
Oh, great question to start off with. I am really, really passionate about helping companies that want to do great things that improve our national security and the security, global security, really. So that is where my number one passion is at the moment, is trying to help these startups that are doing great things in defense and aerospace.
That's amazing. I always say that we have the best problems of any industry. So they're the best problems to solve. They're the biggest problems. They're the most critical version of that problem, whether it's AI or drones or now AR, VR, whatever you want to call it, XR now. Whatever that flavor of that thing is, if you're working in gaming or you're working in social media or you're working with large language models, whatever that flavor of it is, come over to our side. The water's warm. We've got a lot of things happening. Very interesting. I appreciate that you're working on that intersection. How have you seen that change in the recent, let's say, 6 months or 6 years?
So let's rewind the clock by about 5 years. Let's use Google as an example. 5 years ago, 2018, Google was part of Project Maven. And the activist employees inside of Google essentially revolted. They had thousands that came out and said, we don't want to be a part of Project Maven. Now, for those that might not be aware, Project Maven was a program to take computer vision and apply it to the processing, exploitation, and dissemination of drone footage. And these employees were concerned that by being involved, their work would contribute to kinetic effects and the killing of people. And so they wanted nothing to do with it. So 5 years ago, not very long, we were in a position where nobody in tech wanted to touch defense. Fast forward to today, and it is polar opposite. And I think that there's been a few things that have come about to cause that shift. And a lot of it, we can look at 2020 as being one of those critical years. So historically, you have these once-in-a-generation events that happen. World War II, landing somebody on the moon, the fall of the Berlin Wall, 9/11. Now, fast forward to 2020, you've got COVID. That's the first thing that hits. And we realize that we have massive issues in terms of the ability of the government and industry to meet demands that protect our people. The next year, we have another once-in-a-generation event with the January 6th riots at the Capitol. And the last time somebody had really tried to disrupt the Capitol was, I think, in the 50s with some Puerto Rican secessionists. But now we've got a major legitimized political group in America that is so dissatisfied that they are willing to take weapons into the Capitol. And then the next year, we have yet another once-in-a-generation event, which is the Russian war in Ukraine. And so we have all of these events that are happening in rapid succession at the same time that we're seeing massive developments in technology, AI, the XR that you were talking about, all of these things that we've advanced so dramatically, so quickly in the past decade. And we overlay these things on top of each other. And we realize that as a country, that there are bad actors in the world that want to do bad things to us. And we have certain tools that we can use to protect ourselves better. And for the first time since probably Fairchild Semiconductor, again in the 50s, 60s, we see this alignment between industry and the Defense Department. And it's fantastic to see and witness. Like we were talking before the show, suddenly defense is cool and it's a great space to be in. But these are, like you said, really, really hard problems that need very thoughtful work to solve in the long term, and not just today, not just chasing the bright, shiny object that is defense today, but making sure that we lay the groundwork over time to be successful in 5, 10, 20 years.
It's interesting to see the narrative shift where there was this concern, if I work with the U.S. government, there's going to be these kinetic effects. There's going to be people that will die as a result of my innovation. So I want to pull back. I don't want to touch anything that might be even related to the military. And my argument that entire time was that by default, you are then providing that innovation to adversarial groups. That seemed like a very outlandish thing to say. It proved to be fairly accurate with the theft of intellectual property and its utilization by adversarial states. And so it kind of was like, as much of an advocate for peace as I could possibly be, I realized that it doesn't actually have the end effect that I want. So I can talk about it as much as I'd like and say, this is how I want the world to work, but the world doesn't work like that, didn't really play out like that. And so I might as well be on the side of controlling the use of my innovation and intellectual property versus giving it away. That has to be somewhere in that contributory mix, but really strange. I mean, I love Google, and I mean, I have deep roots in Silicon Valley tech and just tech in general. And to talk to the same people that they're like, yeah, that policy didn't really play out the way we thought it was going to play out. I love the example of the Fairchild Semiconductor, because that's really what built Silicon Valley. And that whole desire of the government to jump in with industry, jump in with university, and create that triple helix of innovation made it so America is the number one center for innovation, and particularly Silicon Valley is the locus of innovation for the entire world. I feel like it's time to loop back to that. I'm tracking what BMNT with Hacking for Diplomacy, Hacking for Defense is doing to get students involved, and some of the other programs to get universities involved, because I feel like that's the third pillar of that mix. We need all of our smart people in one bucket, understanding the problems, walking it towards. It's a long road to getting back there. You have a lot of perspective working in Future Command, working as an engineer and a director of engineering on the customer side, on the user side, and then now on the capital side. So you have that overarching experience. Kind of odd question about progression or like knowledge and understanding of needs. It doesn't seem to be that we lack smart people, right? Or that we lack the ability to execute on smart ideas. Very easy to argue that we don't have an innovation problem. We have lots of innovation. I agree that we actually have too many ideas. And even in the market, even in the defense market, we're probably developing the same idea multiple times, if anything. But it seems like we have an implementation issue. I can go to an event and speak right to a command, show them what you can do with an open source product, or like what teenagers are doing and with Arduino, and show somebody. And it's like, wow, I wish I had that. I wish, there's a company that's already doing this. This is really cool. But there's a huge gulf between, hey, this thing exists, and we need, of course, a better version of this, more application focused. But like, how can I use this next year? That might not even be possible.
Yeah, man, you're hitting on something really, really important there, which is how do we expedite this whole process? Because the government works on multi-year programs through the FIDET, through the Future Years Defense Program, to plan and budget against what we think we're going to need in the future. But that isn't realistic with the speed that innovation happens and that the advancements in the technology are going through. And so how do we then reconcile it? And I think we've made some progress with the application of SBIRs and sitters through other transaction authorities and some of these other non-FAR contracting based methods that we have. But is it sufficient? And the answer is no, of course it's not. We need to do a better job in terms of defining the requirements quickly, developing the capabilities rapidly, and then going out and using commercial off-the-shelf solutions to then prototype or to iterate off of to come up with the actual solutions that we need long-term. And we can do it. But again, I think on the government side that we can do a better job of accelerating the process that we go through for defining those requirements, right? So right now, the JSIDS, the Joint Capability Integration Development System, JSIDS, is, I think, scheduled to take 180 days. So we say that it's only going to take us 180 days to get a validated requirement. That's absolute garbage, because there's a lot of front-end work that's happening before the clock starts ticking. The clock starts when the first general officer takes a look at it and says, yeah, I think this is interesting, in an entry gate form, and then it goes in through, then they've got 180 days. And oh, by the way, we're still not hitting that 180 days more often than not. it's taken up to a year, plus all of that front end work. So how do we accelerate all of that? And that requirements process is deliberate for a reason, but there are some efficiencies that I think we should be looking for and identifying and trying to find so that we can accelerate that up to better match with the speed of innovation. That would go a long way. And then we're still not seeing maximum use of OTAs, those other transaction authorities. And I think we could see some improvement there. I'm not a contracting guy by background or acquisitions guy. I don't want to get too deep into that conversation because I'll get out of my depth very quickly. But I do believe that we have some room for improvement there.
Yeah, I just see it from the startup side, working with somebody. And of course, it's SBIR season right now. So I spent all morning reading people's submissions, connecting them with, hey, here's an advisor. That's what we've been doing for the past couple of weeks, right? It's great. They're going to get 180 or 250. It depends on who they're working with. We talk about this valley of death over and over again in capital and whether we should go bootstrap or we should get venture funding, venture back. And you look at the SBIR process and it looks like a bootstrapping process, but what people don't realize is there might be a year between their phase 1 and their phase 2. And if they're a small team, they've spent a lot of time managing that $250K that they've gotten, or they've built something. So they've actually spent the money. It's not like they get free money. And it's that gap in between, it just kills a lot of the commercialization process, because between phase 2 and phase 3, or even getting paid with an OTA to build a prototype and then going to program of record, that could take 3 years. If you're a small company, it's kind of hard to float that space. I do like that there's more acquisition vehicles or other strategies, but I just see it like this. Ideally, we want to bootstrap. I think if we have a really great opportunity, people should look at funding. It is rocket fuel, right? If you need to move faster or need to buy things and hire, and it's really the only method that you're going to have. But if I have to compete against Lockheed, and I mention them a lot on this show because they're the big dog, not because I hate Lockheed. We've done lots of great projects. I have friends at Lockheed, right? And it's like, everybody knows what I'm talking about. They can afford to wait the 3 years to get a program of record. We can't. And so we've got to figure out a different strategy to go. And I was reading on your Substack about roll-ups. So I kind of wanted to just get your take on teaming, consortia, roll-ups, like that's kind of more collaborative approach to getting that program of record or going after business. Like, how does that relate to maybe staying alive?
Awesome question. And my thoughts on how to stay alive for a small business in defense have matured a lot in the past year. And the outlook for long-term exits and how they can disrupt the industry overall has matured as well. Right. So a year ago, I thought we will see some new primes coming out of tech. And maybe we will. I hope we do. Then I started thinking, well, how do we actually get to that point? And that's where this idea of the roll-ups came is, well, you need something that's large enough to actually start pulling some of the business away from the existing primes, start funneling off and channeling off some of that cash so that their relative strength to these other companies kind of gets a little bit more equal. And once we start equalizing the playing field that way, well, now the bar to entry gets a little bit lower for everybody else too, all these subsequent companies that would come along. And I said, well, what if we did a roll up in the aerospace and defense industry that, through acquisition as a strategy is able to grow strong enough that they can then survive. And I think there's still something to that. And there are plenty of private equity firms out there that are executing that. You see it with some of these private companies and public companies. Raytheon has grown through acquisition. L3 has as well. Callye. So we're seeing these companies doing that.
It seems like Andrew is pursuing a flavor of that strategy at their size, like to try to grow as rapidly as possible, because they have in the investment capital.
Yeah. So let's remember, Andrew raised their Series E less than a year ago, and now we're seeing the deployment of that capital through some of these acquisitions. Right? They cranked it up. I think they've done 3 in the past 6 months. Which is, great for them. And I think that Andrew stands a really good chance of being one of those disruptive primes in the future. But the other thing that has really gotten me thinking is this idea of strategic partnerships that you kind of hit on too, of Well, maybe what we're really seeing is the outsourcing of innovation from the primes who are unwilling or unable to invest in innovative concepts because they have to answer to their shareholders in a way that a private company doesn't. And so it's a lot harder for them to justify R&D money when the government isn't asking for specific R&D. So now you've got these small startups that are executing R&D essentially, and then they can create a strategic partnership with the prime, or, at some point in time get acquired by that prime. And while it doesn't scratch my itch for disrupting the primes and creating this really new ecosystem of having a lot more companies doing an equal amount, but it is still a way that we can get innovation from these great companies that are doing a lot through the primes to the government. So I think you're right that strategic partnerships and roll-ups are part of that solution long-term for these private companies.
Yeah, the primes, the disproportionate advantage that they offer is that they understand how to provide all the support and the training and the depot and all the extras that are around delivering innovation and supporting it long-term. So that's why they're able to get the programs. Whereas like me, I make secure compute, secure data transport products. Like, it's like, here's the thing, that's it. I'm never going to be able to compete against them. Yeah, if we look at it from a teaming approach and say, what am I actually trying to do? Trying to make a C2 system for XYZ. So what do I need? Software. I need to be able to pull in this. I need to be able to visualize this like this. Who does this well? And start to look and map it out. Then I'm competing on a system of systems level. And that's really where people like Lockheed and Raytheon shine. They are supporting basic acquisition for groups, but really they're doing that as a service. That's not their products, right? They sell an entire system. Turn it on, it works. It's a radar system. It's a guidance system. It's not like a screen. And that's where it's really hard because the systems are complex and small businesses are unable to deliver that complex of solutions by themselves. So teaming is really the only way that I know of to come in, as a group and say, I've got 5-6 companies. Look at this best of breed solution. What do you like about this? What do you not like about it?
And so then I think one of the challenges for the community in general is to highlight these companies in a way that gets them in front of the primes and the right people at the primes, because these are massive organizations, 10,000 people, right? So you could be talking to somebody and it might not be the right person that can actually use that technology, but highlighting that and showcasing it in a way that when the prime does go to bid on a contract, it can say, oh, by the way, remember XY company or Z company, let's go to them and sub it out to them and have them be part of the solution.
The industry doesn't put a lot of effort towards like inter-vendor matchmaking. And in tech, you see this all the time. Is if I'm a hardware provider, I'm looking for the best software to put it on. I'm looking for the best data center to deploy it, the best services company to service it, the best MEPS company to design the architecture. I'm not trying to do all those things myself. I'm trying to offer all of those things together. This is a very common strategy for large businesses in the mortals category, right? In the small to medium business category, it's not invented here a lot of times. And in defense, we're already siloed enough. So that's a really interesting perspective of that. We actively, obviously I have this podcast, right? So we actively go out and talk to people like yourself or, other small businesses, startups, try to do this, but it's not really that common.
It's not common. And like I said, my ideas are maturing all the time on this. And so it was, only in that conversation did I say, well, maybe this is what we need to be doing. It's not common. And I think it's effective, right? I've seen it with some of the companies that I've been working with that the more that I help make those introductions, the more fruitful they are. And there's kind of that network effect, which is, when a company goes out and picks its advisors, it's often looking at these senior general or flag officers who have been around the Beltway, have been around the Pentagon. And oh, by the way, they also know a lot of these primes because now they've got the ability to tap into that network to actually get showcased. So I think it is happening, perhaps not deliberately. And maybe that's somewhere somebody listening to the podcast will have a great idea of saying, hey, let me start a company that's going to focus on these connections or start a an event to showcase startups.
And the example that I give people is I might have peanut butter, you might have chocolate. Like they're both very viable products in and of themselves, but you combine them and then you have a whole candy aisle. Half the candy aisle are just those two ingredients, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Lots of different variations of it, and add one more little ingredient, you've got another 100 set of products. So the peanut butter and chocolate strategy of software, hardware, or AI plus data, or whatever, sensor systems plus data ingestion, it's a multiplicative effect versus an additive effect.
Well, I was going to say that I think the other ingredient that has to be there is trust, and that takes time and effort to build. And part of the reason that the primes are able to really win a lot of these contracts is because the government knows that they have the ability to actually deliver. And so while we see a solution that comes along that might be better, the trust matters. And so these partnerships will take time to create and a lot of touch points. But I do think that trust becomes an essential ingredient along with the chocolate and the peanut butter.
This is interesting. Do you think that expediency of need overrides or lowers the trust barrier? Because I see what's happening in Ukraine, and there's a lot of capability being deployed that I don't think that we would deploy a year ago or 2 years ago, just because there's a new need. And it's like, here's a thing. We need a drone. Slap a sensor on it. Let's try it. We'll do it. We'll do a demo. We're going to do it live.
I think that's a really great point. Was it Edison that said necessity is the mother of invention? Maybe we need a corollary, the Callye corollary, that necessity is also the mother of adoption, because I think you're right. And the other aspect there is that there's a moral hazard. We can apply these systems knowing that the negative, if something goes wrong, right, if the trust isn't there and everything falls apart, it's not going to have as adverse of effect on us as it will on somebody else. And so maybe that goes into that calculation too.
Let's talk about the looming specter, the budget thing. And I'm not talking about not passing a budget. We could talk about that. I'd rather not. What I'd like to talk about is, so we hit on trust. And I understand large organizations they're sustainment missions, right? Companies get big because they're stable. And that's why you don't see as much innovation, or you see outsourcing of innovation from the primes, from military, from any big business. They have to cordon it off, put guardrails around it, purchase it, acquire it, acqui-hire it, whatever you want to think. If we look at how much the DoD and IC in general trusts innovation, we can put a metric on it of actual budget. Like, what do they spend of the actual, let's say, budget it's not going towards people's pay, their pensions, healthcare. The actual, I can choose what I spend my money on, capability, capacity-wise. I can add up all of this small business spend. I can add up all of the startup spend, which is a fraction of the small business spend, and I can say, this is what you're spending on this directive. There's a lot of push. Hey, we want more of this, but raw numbers, and it is massively increased since 2015, 2016, massive increase. I think with DIU and the other programs and the utilization of OTAs and the assistance that everyone provide, we're like 100x where we were 10 years ago. But from a raw number standpoint, the trust isn't there. The trust in innovation from that sector, to me, it's not quantifiably there. The qualitative metrics have gone up significantly, but the quantitative metrics of like how many billions of dollars are spent on startup and small business innovation, like what's the budget? In a lot of the cases up until just now, the budget was $0.
That's really an interesting way of looking at that. I guess I'm a little floored here trying to think of how I would even respond to that. Interestingly, though, I think one of the things that we can look at as we try to quantify that is what is being spent on procurement or P1 dollars versus what's going into the R1 dollars, the RDT&E. Is that difference growing or contracting? I know a couple of guys, not even sure who, kind of looked at it earlier this year and said, hey, look, it's been contracting, right? We're spending more on RDT&E than we used to relative to procurement. But I've also seen projections that show, well, yeah, we did that for a while as we were coming out of some of these wars and we were ramping up saying, hey, we need to get focused on 2030 or beyond. So we invested more in the RDT&E, and now it's kind of opening back up because now we are saying, hey, maybe we either A, we have the solutions and we know what we need, so we don't need to keep iterating on the research and development, or we're outsourcing that R&D to somebody else. And hopefully it's more of the second, but I do see a lot of documents still coming through for new requirements. So I know that we're still looking for solutions. We don't have all the solutions we need for 2030, at least on the Army side. That gap growing could be a positive indicator of, hey, we are starting to trust industry a little bit more to develop and test some of these solutions for us.
Yeah, it's just a big question that I get pushback from, startups. Is portion of what we're doing is saying, hey, do you sell to the U.S. government right now? Do you sell to DoD, IC? Almost every startup says no. It's like, no, I can help you do that. What is that going to look like? Let's walk down this road, have this conversation about becoming a dual use company. Usually, this is a very easy conversation to have. There's a question of like, okay, well, what's the spend look like? How do we get in? What does this market look like? Is it worth, for a startup that's gotten $200 million of investment and they're working in the automotive industry, is it worth my time to then just jump in and work with the Army or work with the Air Force? For me, as a tech geek, like, I think using that technology and bringing it to, our customers and our partners is awesome, right? So I'm like, oh, I'm really excited about this thing. Even with the list of startups that have recently obtained investment that are dual use, it's really hard. There's no policy or chart or anything that I can give to people that are in commercial tech and say like, look, here's all this, spending that's going right to companies like you, and this is increasing, and there's a lot of kind of cut and paste activity that has to happen to attract people, and it's not quite as clear. I like what the Army has with 2030 and other programs to go out and be able to demo solutions. So like, if I'm a company, I can just go to a demo and show everybody, hey, you said this is what you want. Is this what you want? And it's pretty porous now. And to have, the need statements out there, but when they want to take this and go to their board, there's not like the government coming out and saying, hey, in AI sensor data fusion, we are going to spend X billion dollars and we have 500 million to just blow on innovation. Like, we want to see ideas. We're going to spend 100 million or 10 million. It's interesting. I think we're like getting there, but it's like hard to make that argument for people.
It is. And I don't want to defend the government on this one, because I think there are ways of doing it. I think the knee-jerk response to come out of the government on that is going to be something along the lines of, a lot of this, what we're looking at is still classified in terms of the use cases and how we would use this technology. And we don't want to tip our hand to adversarial nations of what we're trying to do. But we can still give some pretty broad overviews. And we try through the BAAs, coming out of the research laboratories or DARPA or things like that. We try, but I think you're right that we could be doing a better job. But I want to ask you a question now, Callye, because you hit on something which was dual use. And I'm curious if you think that dual use is as in vogue today as it was a year ago, and how that has changed.
It's a kind of a complicated question to unpack. I think that it is a buzzword in some ways. So similarly to the obsession of adoption with 5G or current obsession with AI, I'm like, this is just another iteration of something that's been around for a while. So you see like really people pushing dual use hard. The big credibility point to dual use is that it helps me be able to travel across the valley of death, or the actual multiple different valleys of death that you're going to experience as a defense startup, because it's not between like SBIR 1 and SBIR 2. If there's constantly these gaps between going from one side to the other. My company, we started as a machine shop. We're a manufacturing company. We do lots of other stuff other than our big innovation initiatives. So we're crossing the valley of death because we're doing multiple different things. We also have multiple lines of business. If you're a startup, you have one thing that you're doing, you don't have it. And so dual use, the concept of this is that now I can have a commercial arm that's selling and I can fill in the gaps. Now, the problem with this is that that's a completely different sales team. Sales cycle is different. The marketing is different. The channels are different. And your advisors are going to be different. The structure of your business, the cybersecurity is going to be different. The compliance is different. And so I think it's an easy term for people to slap onto a company. It's very difficult to actually execute on. Yes. And so it's become more and more popular, particularly in the VC community. And I totally understand why. It makes a robust business. And we're kind of like, hey, I think defense, then this is total personal opinion, but it's also based on like how I can help people versus someone else. So this is just, backed by, this is the resources that I have, and say, I think that government use, DoD use, IC use is a great first customer. I think it's an amazing place to go talk to people. It's an amazing place to get real need statements out of people, to get the funding to develop your idea. But you should be evolving where maybe that's your secondary customer. That's your secondary line of business. And so if you need to build a graph of like, we're going to build this and we're going to deliver it to this high value customer first, but what's our volume or scale customer? Or is that something we don't want to do? And there isn't enough talk about that transition, is that if I want to be a dual use company, I need to be evolving. And like, when is the good time to start evolving my commercial sales or the light version of my product or the not secret version of my product? And so it is very necessary to have those conversations. And because it's really popular right now, people aren't having them. I think they're leading people down a road which exacerbates the valley of death instead of solving it.
I think you are 100% correct that the work has to go into identifying a realistic go-to-market strategy that can capture that dual use. And I don't think people do that. I think they just say, hey, we're going to sell a little bit on the side and to the government at the same time, and everything will be good, because that will kind of provide us enough capitalization that we can get over that valley of death. What I'm saying is that I am reassured to hear you say kind of the same thing, that people need to have these conversations and be very deliberate in terms of how they go about building the plans and strategies that they will execute on if they want to try and diversify, because too often it becomes a distraction trying to do both. And it goes back to that Aesop's fable of the donkey and the guy and his kid. And eventually they all fall into the water because you're trying to please everybody and you can't get it right because you're doing too much. So I think you're right, though, that you can do it as long as you are smart about how you implement and go about building those plans.
Yeah, my biggest advice for people is, and again, take this with a grain of salt, because this is, again, how I help people, is find a channel partner. So we use a channel partner for commercial business because I don't want to be involved in commercial business at all. Sell to most of the top tech companies that you can rattle off, but that's not really something that I understand deeply. It operates very differently. Like I don't go to their place, whereas in defense, like I'm at their location talking to them every single week. So I kind of understand that space pretty well. It's what I've done my whole life. Conversely, that's what I would advise, is go find a business development group, go find an advisor or mentor or a sales partner that understands that a new industry or space, and work with them, test and try it, taste it. If you feel like you could do it yourself, bring it in-house. But like, it's very difficult to just build up a whole sales team and like a whole BD team and like an engineering team that understands like a whole different world, spend all that money and then get like one sale after 3 years,
And at the end of the day, most technology companies or most companies in general that are selling to defense will need to have a commercialization plan that goes beyond. Right, because while the Defense Department has a annual budget this year, I think it's around $830 billion for 2024. What's actually getting spent out of that on technology is only one little slice. And so the market availability within the defense is limited, and it's a great place to get some traction early on quickly. But unless you are building munitions or something that is strictly defense, then you want some sort of commercialization that goes beyond it at some point in time so you can continue to grow. And again, I just think that, as long as a company is smart in their approach to it and deliberate, that they can be successful doing it as a dual use strategy early on. However, a lot of them, I don't see them actually doing that. So just kind of have tended to caution them against trying to adopt dual use too early.
And it's been great having you on, Andrew. I think we could extend that conversation probably privately a lot longer, but it's nice to see your perspective because, again, you do have that perspective from engineering on the customer side, on the user side. So ingesting innovation and technology, and then that advice on the capital side and on the market side. So like what's wise to bet on and what's wise to go after because we need it, right? I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and share that with us.
Yep. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk, and hopefully we'll get to do it again sometime.
How can everyone follow with you, or if they're interested in something that you talked about? Is LinkedIn a good place? Or
LinkedIn is probably the best place. So that would be linkedin.com, the /in/Andrew Glenn 161, or Substack is the other one, Building Our Defense on Substack, and that's andrewglenn.substack.com.
Great. We'll put both of those links in the description for everybody. A little quick aside, on your Substack, you've got some great memes. So thank you for bringing a human touch and a little bit of levity to our industry, because we work on very serious topics, but in general, we're normal people too. So it's great to...
I'll throw in an old Van Wilder quote, right? Like, don't take life too seriously. You'll never get out alive.
Yeah.
And we do a really, really important and serious business. And it's important that we remain human too.
Yeah. It's more fun to work with fun people. So even when you're doing something is super serious. So I appreciate that. But everyone should check out what Andrew's up to, because it's many things, and a lot of things that we just didn't cover because we don't have 4 hours. We're not Joe Rogan. We can't talk all day long. So, all right. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Callye. Appreciate it.
This has been the Startup Defense. Thank you.